Biltong. It's a South African delicacy, an air-cured meat, not to be confused with jerky. Every South African knows what this is. And for those South Africans that no longer live in South Africa, this recipe is for you. I am by no means a purist when it comes to making biltong, but I had to figure out how to make this in a sustainable way that my family can have it on a regular basis. Let's get started. When it comes to choosing a piece of meat to make your biltong with, something important to note is that the muscle striations or fibers need to run in one direction. This is actually eye of round, and it works really well. I have made it with venison backstrap since the fibers also run in a long lengthwise pattern. I've used a sirloin tip roast, that worked just fine, and a rump roast also. I have actually also used brisket, and that was nice and fatty and it was great. So some people like it more lean and some people like it fatty. If you want to add fat, it will cure just fine and it will be delicious. You're going to cut along the grain of the muscle in about 3/4 inch thick slices, about 15 millimeters. The thickness depends on how dry or moist you enjoy your biltong, but it just takes longer or shorter for it to dry out too. So whatever you want your final product's piece size to be, that is how thick you're going to cut it. And this works really great for us. I line the cut pieces up inside a cooler to get it ready for the wine and vinegar brine. I add in this entire bottle of wine and half a bottle of apple cider vinegar, along with a whole bunch of ice and a little bit of water. And I leave it out on the counter since it's in a cooler to sit in the brine for about a day. After a day, or sometimes in my case, 2 days, I take all the pieces of meat, lay them on a kitchen towel and dry them off before they're ready for their spice cure. My spice ratio is 1 part salt, 1 part whole seed coriander, 1 part whole seed black pepper, and half sugar. I use sucanat, that's why it looks so different in that picture. And I use Baja Gold sea salt. Before I dip my meat in the spices, I grind the whole seeds. But as far as the measuring is concerned, I measure a whole cup of each salt, coriander, black pepper, and then half sugar. I spread some of my spice rub in a pan, and then I dip my dried off meat in there, and I make sure that I get it on all sides of the meat, back, front, and sides. Once all the pieces of meat is covered with a spice rub, I like to put it in a container that's not metal or plastic. I normally use a Pyrex pan or an enameled pot, something that has a lid that you can put on because you're going to put this in the fridge for another day. After about a day, or in my case, 3 days, the meat is ready to be placed in a dehydrator. I like to lay the meat flat because I've noticed that I can put more meat in the dehydrator than the traditional way of hanging them up. You can certainly do that, but I promise you laying them flat tastes exactly the same. How long you're going to put it in a dehydrator is a personal preference. Some people like more moist, some people like more dry. If you cut some pieces thicker and other pieces thinner, sometimes you can just leave it in there for the same amount of time and everybody can be happy. Just remember, you're going to dry this on air only. No heat. This is biltong, not jerky. It took about 3 days to get to the dryness that we prefer, which is medium. If your dehydrator has a timer that turns off after 12 or 24 hours, you have to remember to reset that. The next step is to slice it. And even though you could use a knife to do it, it is kind of difficult. Biltong is kind of tough. Electronic slicer is really the best way to go, and you can actually buy a pretty inexpensive one. This is not the one I have, but it is something along the sort. A couple of tricks before you slice. Normally, I would put the biltong in the fridge so it can get cold prior to slicing. And if your slicer is very powerful, you can even put it in the freezer, especially for those that enjoy very rare biltong, that it's not so gummy or tough to slice. It's very hard, and as you slice it, it starts to melt. It's perfect. Here we have the final product, sliced against the grain, of course. I only slice what my family wants to eat in about 2 weeks, and I keep it in the fridge. The rest of the whole pieces, I vacuum seal and keep in the freezer for another time. So when we want to eat some more, we can just take it out and slice, and we're good to go. The small end pieces that didn't get sliced in the process, or the pieces of biltong that got dried out in the fridge and it's kind of left over. I know, it's kind of like leftover bacon. It's hard to believe that you could have leftover biltong. But for the things that dried out in the fridge and is really dry, I put them in a coffee grinder or a spice grinder, and I grind it until it's a biltong dust. And this is fantastic to mix with like a cream cheese or a white sauce like a bechamel sauce. It's great to put in mac and cheese. It's fantastic on a grilled cheese sandwich, or just to sprinkle on a salad, or to dip your finger in. It's excellent. I hope you enjoyed this video, and now you have a sustainable way to make it for your family too.